Hi, I'm Rob from Mick's Garage. Today we're going to show you how to service your car. Now that might sound like a fairly daunting task, but really it's a fairly simple series of smaller jobs. We're going to change the oil and oil filter, we're going to change the fuel filter, we're going to change the air filter and the pollen filter or the cabin filter. Before we start, we'll just take a quick look at some of the gear that we're going to use during this service. So, engine oil. At Mick's Garage we stock Castrol and Total brands of oil. Today we're going to use Castrol. A specialist piece of kit that we're going to use is this oil drain pan. Just makes our life a bit easier than using a bucket or a tray. Filters. At Mick's Garage we stock a range of filters so that we can cover all makes and models of car. Blueprint, UFI, Wicks and Coopers. And then just a bag of rags, we're going to have a few spills, just handy to have them there to wipe them up, and nitrile gloves just to protect your hands. To start the service we want to have the car on a flat, level surface, and ideally the engine will be warm, not hot so you burn yourself, just warm so that the oil can flow out of the engine much more freely. The car we're using for this demonstration, by the way, is a 2005 Volkswagen Golf with the 2-litre TDI engine. One of the most common engines that you'll find fitted to a whole range of cars on the road, from Skoda and Seat and Audi and Volkswagen. So the first job we're going to do is change the oil and the oil filter, and the first part of that job then is to take the under tray, the plastic under tray, off from the car, and it's just held on with a series of screws like this. Just take them out, and then we can get access to the sump plug and drain the oil out. Now we've got the under tray out, we can get to the sump plug and we can drain the oil out. Now to take the oil out of the sump, or to drain the oil out of the sump rather, we need to undo, there's a 90mm bolt, so we have a 90mm socket. We're going to get an oil drain pan, take the bung out and get that ready in position. Keep the cap somewhere safe and we can get started. Now while the oil is draining out at the bottom end of the engine, we can start work on the top end of the engine and we can change the oil filter. So first thing we need to do is take this plastic cover off. It just pops off on this particular car and we can see the oil filter housing here. We need to take that off. The oil filter is inside there and we're going to change that for a new one. The top of the oil filter housing takes a 32mm socket. It's made of plastic, so just be careful. And we just screw that until we can get the cover off. We can get to the paper element inside. Okay. Now the filter's coming with the cap, so we're just going to leave it there just for a second or two, just to drain back down into the filter housing so we don't get oil everywhere. We'll come back to that in just a minute once it's drained. Now that's drained for a minute, we can just wiggle the filter and the cap out, get a bit of rag there just to catch any drips, because there are going to be some, and we can just lay that down here on top of the engine and we can compare it to our new filter to make sure that we've got the right one. And we just take the cap off the oil filter. We can see the two filters side by side, new and old. You can see that they're slightly different patterns, but that doesn't matter a bit. Once the physical dimensions are the same, then it's going to fit perfectly. So we've got the new filter and we also got the new O-ring for the oil filter cap here. You can just see it here, we have to take this one off. We might need a screwdriver to prise that off. We probably will. We won't. New one goes on. Put it back into the cap. That clips into place, and then we can just pop the filter back down into the housing. Wiggle it back down into place. Just do it up by hand to start with. Make sure that the threads are nicely seated. Be very easy to cross thread it because it's plastic. This doesn't have to be done up very tight at all. It's 25 Newton meters. If you don't have a torque wrench, no, that's just pinch tight. You can feel the resistance there, and just a fraction, and then that's all we need. Now we've changed the oil filter on the car. The next job we have to do is fill it up with oil. I've put the sump plug back in already. No, we won't waste your time showing you that because it's just the exact reverse of what we did to undo it. So here's where the oil goes in, and we're going to do it a little bit at a time because we don't want to overfill it, as we can cause damage to various parts of the engine on the catalytic converters or diesel particulate filters and so on. So make a note of where you put the caps. The last thing you want to do again is lose them inside the engine bay somewhere. Get your bit of rag in case you have any spills, and we pour about a half of the oil in, and then we'll check on the dipstick to see what our level is. Now we've got the dipstick here, we're just going to dip this and see what oil level we've got. We've left it just for a minute to let the oil that we poured into the engine run down into the sump, which is important. And now you can see on the dipstick here, it's starting to register. We're getting close to the halfway point here, so we just want to top it up a little bit more. Now we've just topped the engine up with another quarter litre of oil, say. We've got the filler cap back on. We're going to fire the engine up, let it run for a minute, and let the oil circulate and find its natural level. We'll turn the car off, and then we will check the oil level again after a few minutes when the oil has drained back down into the sump. Now we let the engine run, and it's a good job we did because it did need quite a bit more oil adding into it, so we topped it up another quarter of a litre, and now you can see we're just at the halfway point on the dipstick there. That's perfect. So that's our oil change done and dusted. Now we're going to start and change the fuel filter. This is the fuel filter housing on this car, and hopefully we can just change the filter by taking this entire cap off, lifting the filter out and changing it out for the new one. Here's the new one. Comes with all the seals and O-rings and washers that we need as well. So let's just take this ring of bolts off at the top and have a look what's inside. Now we'll just undo these one by one. Just a tip while we're at this, if there's any particular part of this job, this service that you're concerned about or more concerned than others, then it's always a good idea to do that job first, because if anything were to go wrong or you didn't have the tool that you needed or the part that was incorrect or something like that, then you should have plenty of the day left in which to sort it out. So we just take these out one by one, put them somewhere safe. Now we can just take the cap off and we just hold it out of the way. I'll pop it down here so that it's out of the way, and we need to take this little blue retaining clip off. A little bit fiddly. There we go. 1, 2. Now we can just pull the filter out. You just kind of pull and twist. It's a little bit tight, a bit fiddly, a bit messy. That's where these gloves really come in handy. Diesel's pretty nasty stuff. You don't really want to get it on your hands. Now we've got the fuel filter free of the housing. We've let it drip for as long as possible, and as you can see from the muck on my fingers, it's well ready to be changed. Before we go any further, we're just going to double check that the new and the old filter are identical so that we know that it's going to fit, and they are. So now we're ready to carry on. The next thing we're going to do is to remove the fuel filter housing, and we're going to tip out all the diesel sitting in the bottom and all the sediment that's collected at the bottom of it. There are just 3 bolts holding the housing on, and I've 2 of them out already. We're just going to take the last one out, and we should then be able to just lift the housing out. Now we have all the bolts undone, we can just prise this out, and be careful because it's full of fuel, and you can see the colour of this fuel now that's about to pour out. As we get to the bottom, it should be pretty mucky. Now we've got the filter housing back in place. We're just undoing doing up the 3 bolts again, and then we can just put the filter back in and top it up with a little bit of fuel first. So we have our diesel in our can here. We're just going to fill it up maybe a third of the way. We don't want it to overflow when we put the filter back into the housing. Have some of your rags handy as well. Just fill it up. You can probably see, well hopefully you can see on the camera, this diesel's a much cleaner, more yellowy colour than the kind of murky stuff that we poured out of the housing earlier on. Now that'll do. Now we're ready to put the new filter back in. It looks to be the same on both ends, but we're going to put it in the same way as the old one came out, with the writing on the bottom. So we just pop that in and wiggle it into position. Just takes a little bit of gentle pressure. Oh, bit of fuel coming out there. Just nice and slowly eases back down, and you have to push it all the way. Now it is spring loaded at the bottom. And we can see it, that's fully seated, and then we just have to put the little clip back on the top, and that goes in that way. Press that in, that's that. And then a new O-ring, which we put straight onto the lid rather than into the housing there. And now we just pop the cap back on, and we can do up all the bolts that hold it down. Now we've tightened up all the bolts on top of the filter housing, we're just going to have a wipe around with the cloth here just to wipe up any diesel that's spilled, so that we can easily spot any leaks, should we have any, when we start the car back up again. Now we've changed the fuel filter, and the only job left to do there is to prime the system. What we have to do is get into the car and turn the ignition one turn, and you can hear, if you turn all the fans off and everything, you can just hear the fuel pump whirring in the back of the car towards the boot. Just do that 3 times. And the car should start first time. It might take a while to settle down to a steady idle, but that's it. Now we've changed the oil and the oil filter, and we've also just changed the fuel filter. Next we've got a nice easy job. We have to change the air filter, usually located somewhere on the top of the engine, nice and accessible. This one's just here, just held on with a series of screws, about 8 in total. I've undone them already just for speed. We just take this off, lifts off really nice and easily, and underneath we can see our air filter. And as you can see, if you look inside, pretty manky, pretty dirty, ready to be replaced. We have a nice new one here. You can see by comparison it's perfectly clean. Simply pops into place. Put the cover back on. Screw it down in position, and that's it. Now we're finished in the engine bay, we can put the plastic cover back on. Just pop it down. That's it. Make sure we haven't left any tools or rags, anything in here that could get caught, right, any belts. Looks good. We're finished. Okay, the very last job we have to do is to change the pollen filter. Now this is the passenger side footwell underneath the glove box, and there's just a polystyrene kind of foam sound deadening material here, which is held in place with 2 kind of plastic screws, which I've removed here. We just then prise this out of the way, remove it all together, and then at the back it's a bit tricky. There's a plastic panel which is locking the filter in place. We just slide it across. A load of muck and gunk's going to fall out probably, and then we can see the filter there, and we pull him out. And all the leaves and bugs and stuff should come with it. It's just a case of wiggling it out. Okay, now that's the filter out. When the 2 filters are side by side, you can see just how filthy the old one is. This clearly hasn't been done at every service as it should be at all, and is well in need of being replaced. So we're ready just to pop this one back in. Now we just slide the new filter back into place. The panel back on. It's a little bit fiddly when we're working upside down. That's that. And then the last job is just to put the sound deadening material back on and the 2 screws back into place. Just the opposite procedure of when we undid them. Okay, so that's it. We've finished our basic service. Hopefully you found that useful and informative. At the very least, if you try to do the job yourself, you'll have saved yourself probably a good 2 hours labour in the main dealer or in the garage, probably the guts of 100, 200 quid maybe even. All the parts that we used during this video and all the tools are available to buy online from mixedgarage.com. As with all our parts, we can deliver anywhere in the UK, Ireland or the rest of Europe within 2 working days.